All good stories are built the same. Stories are told through the hero. The hero is simply the one who lives the story. Stories are born from the ordinary world where it's safe, predictable, and known. And then something happens, an exciting incident. Something barges in or interrupts. Something that if it didn't happen, there would be no story. Jaws starts snacking. E.T. misses his ride home. The boy puts Buzz Lightyear in Woody spot. See, that's how a good story starts. But who built story? Who created the idea of story? See, we all love stories, whether in books or pictures or film. Nothing is more entertaining than a good storyteller. And God built us to respond to story. That's why this is not a rule book. It is not a checklist of do's and don'ts. It's a story. And God built us to respond to story so that we would be drawn to His story. Every good story starts with the ordinary. Rich, prosperous Abram, living in a pagan land. Young, spoiled Joseph, living in his father's house. You planning your summer, minding your own business. Or maybe if you're planning for next school year. Or maybe if you're older, you're planning for college. Or even older, working towards a career. See, we all live our stories. The question is, what is your story? We've come to the end of Genesis. We've seen Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, and Leah. We've seen God working through each one of these people to bring about the promise made to Abraham. The promise that his descendants would be as numerous as the stars. Genesis closes with Joseph and his family dying in Egypt. But the Israelites are growing and prospering. And then begins what I like to call Act 3 of the story. And that is God's people are slaves in a foreign land. Now, as you read the first chapter in Exodus, you need to realize that these few verses actually cover 400 years of history. It wasn't like the Israelites woke up one day and they were suddenly slaves and being tortured. The Pharaoh that brought the Israelites to Egypt, the one who put Joseph in the position of power, was long dead and gone. No one cared about Joseph or anything that had happened. The Israelites began to cry out to God because of their suffering. They had seemed to have given up hope by this point, and understandably so. It raises an important question. Was God really keeping his promises to Abraham if his descendants were slaves in Egypt? Actually, yes. God specifically told Abraham that this would happen. In Genesis chapter 15, he says, "Then the Lord said to him, know for certain that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and that they will be enslaved and mistreated there. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterward they will come out with great possessions." We need to see that the scene is being set for the greatest act of redemption the world had seen to this point. It's such a huge act that is frequently mentioned in the rest of the Bible as clear evidence of God's commitment to his people and his power. Let me ask you, in the last 6 months, have you had something that didn't go according to plan? Yeah, we plan and we plan and we plan backup plans for the plans, and then we have plans just in case all the other plans don't go well. See, we plan. But sometimes, many times, our plans don't work. But what's important to see, not only in our story right now, but in the overall story of God, is even when our plans don't go like we'd like them to, God is still at work. In Exodus chapter 3, we read, "One day Moses was tending the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. He led the flock far into the wilderness and came to Sinai, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from the middle of a bush, and Moses stared in amazement. Though the bush was engulfed in flames, it didn't burn up. 'This is amazing,' Moses said to himself. 'Why isn't that bush burning up? I must go see it.' When the Lord saw Moses coming to take a closer look, God called to him from the middle of the bush and said, 'Moses, Moses.' And Moses replied, 'Here I am.'" Are there certain words or even names that bring back memories or conjure up thoughts about specific times and people? Moses must have been reminded of who he was every time he heard his name. God calls out, "Moses." You got to do a bass-only voice. God is not a tenor. And when God said Moses, Moses surely thought, that's right, I should be dead. I mean, no, that's not what his name means. But if you remember the story, the Israelites are growing in number, and the Pharaoh looks around and he sees that there are just too many of them. That if there was ever a revolt or an uprising, the Egyptians wouldn't stand a chance. And so he orders that all the male Hebrew babies to be thrown into the Nile River. But one mother, Jochebed, decides that she cannot drown her infant. And so she hides him until he's 3 months old, and then puts him in a basket and sends him down the river. I mean, she did what she was supposed to technically, just only in a basket. Do you find it ironic that Jochebed happened to put her baby in the river at the same time that Pharaoh's daughter was bathing in the river? She sees the baby. She knows it's a Hebrew baby. She knows that her father has ordered all male babies to be killed, but for some reason she keeps it. She needed a Hebrew mother to nurse the baby. So who does she end up picking? Jochebed, the baby's mother. Do you find it ironic? I don't. Because, see, there's always this lower story. The story of what happens here each and every day. But then there's this upper story where God is moving and working and doing things that we can't ever comprehend. After the baby is nursed, Pharaoh's daughter takes the baby. And so she names him Moses, which means I pulled him out of the water. Well, as time progressed, Moses is raised in Pharaoh's home. He has the best education that could be offered. He had it made, and then one decision changed everything. One day when he saw an Egyptian taskmaster beating an Israelite, he became so angry that he attacked the Egyptian and ended up killing him. And then he tried to bury the body. He was just going to pretend like nothing happened. Then the next day when he saw two Hebrews fighting and he tried to stop them, they said, "What, are you going to kill us like you killed that Egyptian yesterday?" Uh-oh. See, the jig is up. So Moses flees Egypt because Pharaoh heard about what happened and wanted to kill Moses for it. See, for both Pharaoh and Moses, one small decision changed the course of their life. Moses flees to Midian, where he meets Jethro, his future father-in-law. Now, Jethro had all girls, no boys. It was a problem for Jethro because that meant he had no one to pass his stuff off to until Moses showed up. And so he gives his daughter Zipporah to Moses for his wife. Moses goes from being a wanted man, fleeing his home, to now at least he has some security and comfort. He now has a wife, a family, he owns land, he's got a job. Things are looking up. He keeps his head low. He counts his blessings and he minds his own business for 40 years until that day comes that we read about a few minutes ago. Moses, you were pulled from the water. Moses, you should be dead, but you're not. And Moses says, "Who is it?" Somebody knocks at your door. What do you say? "Who is it?" God says, "You've got to go back to Egypt. You've got to confront the Pharaoh, and you've got to tell him to let my people go." And so Moses says, "Sure." And like Captain America, flies off to save the world, right? Isn't that what it says? No, obviously not. Instead, he goes the route of making excuses. And really, we're hard on Moses, but we make the same excuses even today. See, the first excuse that Moses says is, "I'm the wrong person." God says, "Go," and Moses says, "But who am I?" Verse 11 and 12. But Moses protested to God, "Who am I to appear before Pharaoh? Who am I to lead the people of Israel out of Egypt?" And God answered, "I will be with you, and this is your sign that I am the one who has sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God at this very mountain." Moses says, who am I to do this? You've got the wrong person, wrong number. And understandably so. There were 2 million people to lead out of Egypt. I mean, could you imagine going to Orlando and have to lead the entire population all the way to Houston? It's impossible. Now, take those 2 million people and put them in a situation where they are the country's workers. They supply all the goods that the country needs. And if they left, there wouldn't be any workforce. And now you're forced to go to the ruler of that country and say, you need to let all these people leave, please. Moses knew the task at hand, and he said, you've got the wrong guy. But what does God do? Well, he puts his arm around Moses and says, oh, come on, Moses. You're a great guy. You've got nice hair. You take care of the sheep really good. Hey, you went to the best school in the country. You've got a stand-up education. You can do it, Moses. Think positive. Say it with me. I can do it. If you can see it, then you can do it. Right? I mean, isn't that what we do? We motivational speaker them until they do it. But no, God says, it doesn't matter who you are. I am with you. You ask who you are, that question is irrelevant. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter where you've come from. It doesn't matter how you look or what status you have. It doesn't matter what talents you think or don't think you have. The only thing that matters is that I am with you. You don't know what you're going to do in your future. I am with you. You don't know how you can lead a Bible study or a small group or tell someone about me. I am with you. It doesn't matter who you are as long as you are with me. But of course, Moses goes on to the next excuse. He says, well, then who are you? In verse 13 and 14, but Moses protested, if I go to the people of Israel and tell them the God of your ancestors has sent me to you, they will ask me, what is his name? Well, then what should I tell them? God replied to Moses, I am who I am. Say this to the people of Israel. I am has sent me to you. Basically, I'm going to tell them that God sent me, and they're going to ask which one. Because you see, by now, they had all been raised in a polytheistic society, which means that they believed in many gods. They had gods for every aspect of life, which is actually why God performs 10 plagues, because each one fights a god that the Egyptians worshipped. But you see, these 2 questions are the most fundamental questions we could ever ask. Because everything in our lives, not only here and now, but for all eternity, is based on the right answer to those 2 questions. Who am I and who is God? We need to realize that from the very beginning, God's people are known as those whose God is with them. We belong to him, and there is no way that we can define ourselves apart from God. It is his very presence with us that enables us to accomplish the task he gives us. God answers Moses by saying, I am. And we can read over that and just assume that it was another name for God, but really it is the name for God. His name is I am because he's always existed. We might say, oh, I'm David and I was born in 1984, or I live in Alabama, but God says I am. He didn't come from anywhere. He wasn't born. He just is. He is who he is, and he never changes. This is the most intimate name that God gives, and it's used over 6,000 times in the Old Testament. That tells us that God wants to be known in Scripture, not just as another deity, but as a specific person with a holy, unique character and a special relationship with his people. He basically tells Moses, my name is reality. I am the only one that matters. I am the God of the universe. Everything else is just smoke and mirrors. I am exactly what you need. I am is here. And this is why we do everything that we do. At least it's supposed to be why we do everything that we do. This should give us reason enough to live for him. If we truly believed that and lived that, the world couldn't stop us. If we worshiped on Sunday mornings thinking I am is here, our church would be on fire. If we moved about every day thinking I am is here, then serving him wouldn't be such an inconvenience. When we're faced with a challenging decision, if we thought I am is here, then our decision would be easier. Our conversations would change, our focus would change, our priorities would change. And when we become filled with fear at the idea of trying to share God's story with someone else, if we thought I am is here, then the fear would disappear because we would know that God is all we need. Well, Moses moves on to the next excuse and says, I'm not influential. Over in chapter 4, Moses protested again. What if they won't believe me or listen to me? What if they say the Lord never appeared to you? Then the Lord asked him, what is that in your hand? Moses replied, a shepherd's staff. The Lord told him, throw it down on the ground. So Moses threw down the staff and it turned into a snake, and Moses jumped back. Then the Lord told him, reach out and grab its tail. So Moses reached out and grabbed it, and it turned back into a shepherd's staff in his hand. The Lord told him, perform this sign, then they will believe that the Lord, the God of their ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, really has appeared to you. Moses says, what if they don't believe me or listen to me? And so God asks, what's that in your hand? Well, Moses had been a shepherd for a long time. He probably didn't even think about that stick in his hand. Moses, what's that in your hand? A stick. Nothing special about this stick, just an ordinary, everyday, run-of-the-mill stick. And God asks, throw it down. And when Moses threw it down, it became a snake. That's when it'd be over for me. I'd be like, I'm done. Nope. God said, pick it up. Are you serious? Moses reaches down, picks it up, and it becomes a stick again. But God's not done. He says, now put your hand inside your cloak. And when Moses did, he pulled out a hand that was covered in leprosy. Then God tells him to put it back in his coat. Almost sounds like the hokey pokey a little bit. You put your right hand in, you take your right hand out, it's covered in leprosy, and you shake it all about. But when he pulls out his hand, it's normal again. And God says, it's not about your influence. We're influential because we have God with us. Well, that should be enough, right? Except Moses isn't done. He has another excuse. He says, I'm not comfortable talking about this. Going a little bit further in chapter 4, he says, Moses pleaded with the Lord, O Lord, I'm not very good with words. I never have been, and I'm not now. Even though you have spoken to me, I get tongue-tied, and my words get tangled. Then the Lord asked Moses, who makes a person's mouth? Who decides whether people speak or do not speak, hear or do not hear, see or do not see? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, I will be with you as you speak, and I will instruct you in what to say. I'm just not comfortable talking in front of people. It's just not my thing, God. Not too long ago, a survey was taken, and do you know the number 2 fear was? No, not public speaking, death. Because the number 1 fear was public speaking. So that means that some people would rather be dead than speak in public, which is a little disturbing. Jerry Seinfeld once said, we'd rather be in the casket than be giving the eulogy. But God says, don't worry about what you'll say. I will give you the words. You'll be fine. This should be the last worry on your mind. So at this point, Moses should have just said, okay, and went. But he didn't. Instead, he just said, I'm not going to do this. Continuing on in chapter 4. But Moses again pleaded, Lord, please send anyone else. Then the Lord became angry with Moses. All right, he said, what about your brother, Aaron the Levite? I know he speaks well, and look, he's on his way to meet you now. He will be delighted to see you. Talk to him and put the words in his mouth. I will be with both of you as you speak, and I will instruct you both in what to do. Basically, Moses, his last-ditch effort is find someone else. And it's the first time that we actually see God get ticked off. And do you know how big God is? I know that's a rhetorical question because we can't know how big God is. But he's big. He's the God that created the universe. He's the God that created life as we know it. When I first met my father-in-law, I thought he was a big dude. I thought he was easily 7'8" and could squash me. I was terrified of him. Well, that and all the guns that he had in his house. I knew I didn't want to make him mad. And that can't even begin to compare to how big God is. And it says that the Lord's anger burned against him, or that he became angry with Moses. Because Moses says, you know what? I'm not going to do it. I can't do it. I'm not available at the time. So just find someone else. And God's had enough. He's like, Moses, your name means I pulled you from the water. I saved you. I have a plan for you. I just turned your stick into a snake and gave your hand leprosy. I'm talking to you from a bush that's on fire and not being burnt out. But finally, God just tells him, get up and go. Your brother will meet you on the way. We need to realize that God often calls his people from laying on the couch to leaping in faith. And we can sit there and make excuses all day long, but I really believe we don't want God's anger burning against us. And so Moses goes and he tells the Pharaoh, God has given me a message, and it's, let my people go. And as expected, Pharaoh resisted. And so Moses says, you really shouldn't have done that. Trust me. I know what he's capable of. And so the Nile River is turned into blood. And there's frogs and flies, and the cattle dies, and then there's boils and locusts and darkness, and it goes on and on. And understand, this isn't just a few cool shows. This is a showdown between Yahweh, the God of Israel, and Pharaoh, the supposed son of the sun god Ra. God is taking down one deity at a time, but that's only 9 of them. Then comes number 10, the firstborn. Moses goes to Pharaoh and says, let my people go, or tonight the firstborn of every family will die. How many of you are the firstborn of your family? I'd be gone. My wife would be gone. Some of you would be gone. Moses tells the Israelites that if they didn't want their child to die, to cover their doorway with the blood of a lamb. Pick the perfect lamb, one without blemish, slaughter it and cover their doorways, and the angel of death would pass over their house. Hence the name, the Passover. The next morning, Scripture says there was loud wailing. When all the Egyptians woke up, including Pharaoh, and discovered that their firstborn children were dead. And so Pharaoh called Moses and Aaron, and he said, get out. And 2 million Israelites leave wealthy. Did you know that that night impacts us even today? When we take communion together, now that we are fortunate to be able to gather together again, when we take communion together, that actually has ties to the Passover celebration, the Passover remembrance, where the Jews remembered what God did that night. Here's the thing about excuses. You can always find one. You can always find an excuse to not do what God calls you to do. You can always find an excuse to not serve. You can always find an excuse or something that's more important. But if you lived like you believed that I am is here, I think things would be a lot different around here. I hope you have a blessed week.